Hello, I'm Elizabeth Alfano reporting live for Jane Unchained. Many of you have already watched the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM's live Facebook interview with Dr. Neil Barnard discussing the shocking, irresponsible news that is coming out from the Annals of Internal Medicine that is basically recommending that people continue to eat processed meat and red meat. In fact, the headline is as follows, and this is of course what journalists are going to pick up because they're not going to spend time reading 30-40 page medical studies. They're just going to take the headlines and copy it verbatim and push it out there. So the Annals of Internal Medicine are recommending that there are new guidelines, no need to reduce red or processed meat consumption for good health. Okay, so let's talk about this. I'll give a recap of what Dr. Barnard said, and I thank him for all the work that he does. Let's talk about this for a second. So basically, this study, this new study, they're calling it, is not really a study in and of itself. It is a compilation of existing studies. This compilation was put together by a man named Bradley Johnston with something called NutraRex. No one can figure out where or how they have been funded quite yet, so that's an outstanding question. But he has put together taken the information from these studies and put his own recommendations to that. Now here's where it gets tricky. The studies that he's citing, the studies themselves say that reducing meat, in particular processed meat, but reducing all red meat, does indeed reduce chronic disease. I will give you some, again, from the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine. I will read one of the studies, for example, and maybe I'll read two just to give you a sense of them. This study coming out in 2019, summarizing the results of observational studies, the researchers reported that diets that are low in red and processed meat were associated with 13% lower risk of all-cause mortality, 14% reduction in cardiovascular mortality, 14% reduction in non-fatal stroke, 24% reduction in type 2 diabetes, 10% reduction in overall cancer incidence, 11% reduction in cancer mortality, 59% reduction in extrahepatic cancer incidence, 64% reduction in gallbladder cancer, and 56% reduction in pancreatic cancer mortality. I consider those to be significant. Would you? I would think that as someone who may be suffering right now from type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure or cardiovascular disease, potentially cancer, you would think that these findings would be significant and important. I say significant because of the size of the percentages that I just read, but also significant scientifically in that they are not random. They are not just by chance. I'll read another study that said a similar reduction in processed meat would lead to expected 30% lower esophageal, 7% colorectal, and 10% less breast cancer. So again, I find these numbers to be numbers I would want to know as a general person of the American public. But Bradley Johnston, his recommendation is that these are not significant numbers, therefore not important, and you should just continue to eat red meat. So I find two things very disturbing here. One, that someone would gather all this information and then put out a recommendation that is contrary to the statistics in the studies themselves. That seems a stretch, perhaps even we'll say a fabrication. But what's even more shocking is that the Annals of Internal Medicine would want to publish this, would want to put their reputation on the line. It seems rather shocking. I will say that it's Bradley Johnston of NutraRex and the Annals of Internal Medicine, but not the doctors themselves. The doctors who are associated with these studies are not in agreement with the recommendations. I will quote here one of the authors of the study, who was not told about the recommendations that came from the journal. He found out that his study was used to put forth this kind of recommendation and had the following to say. As a co-author of one of the papers and a physician, I share the concern that the public may view this series of systematic reviews and meta-analyses and resulting clinical practice guidelines as commissioned or endorsed by the American College of Physicians. Our review of dietary patterns low in red and processed meat showed associated reductions in the most important outcomes to patients and public health, all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and cancer mortality. Despite this finding, the recommendation from the guidelines paper, of which I was neither a part nor I was invited to review as one of the co-authors, was that adults continue to consume red and processed meat. I completely oppose this recommendation and worry about the lasting damage to the public and planetary health. It is worth it to note that in the recommendations, not only did they not put forth the actual correct and accurate information from the studies that they compiled, but they also did not take into account any planetary damage or animal welfare issues. And they went on to further comment about why they didn't do that. I'll get to that in the next point. So the first point is that this is just an egregious, non-accurate, intentional, we do not know, but certainly misleading representation of the facts, and then packaged for the press, who doesn't have time to read this, and they're not doctors, for this sort of cancer-causing clickbait, just to get clicks. This is, I'm guessing, a tactic for press and hullabaloo to follow around this, but it doesn't seem responsible journalism in any way, shape, or form, and certainly not in line with the ethics of the medical community. And I think many doctors are up in arms about this. So that in and of itself is quite egregious, that in fact, all the studies say that reducing meat does in fact reduce chronic disease, and they're not putting that recommendation forth. They're putting forth the opposite recommendation, that one would continue to eat something that harms them. So that is just odd, egregious, and irresponsible. Further, all the studies that they took in this compilation were studies of reducing meat. There weren't any studies in the compilation of actually having no meat at all. So it strikes me as logical as if you were going to compare all these studies, you would want to look at people who eat meat, people who reduce meat, and people who eat no meat at all. And we know that if you were to include those studies of people who eat no meat at all, then you would see even greater statistics for the benefits of not having meat and dairy in your diet. For example, you're driving down the highway, speed limit's 55, you're going 75, you reduce your speed to 65. Doesn't mean you're not gonna get a ticket. You've only reduced your speed to 65. If you wanna not get a ticket, you have to go to 55 and cut out speeding altogether. The same is true with eating meat. So I think it's very strange that those studies were intentional, we do not know, but overlooked and omitted. That seems like a gross error. And this would be funny if it weren't so damaging to people's health. It's like a bad Saturday Night Live skit. The study goes as far to say that people like eating meat, and people don't like to change their habits. Therefore, we don't want to bother them. So we're just going to tell them to continue to eat meat. I don't think these people are thinking about their reputations as they put these things into print. That is so comical, it is dangerous. So you have tooth decay. Your mouth is rotting away. Nobody likes to go see the dentist, so we're just gonna let your mouth rot because we don't want to inconvenience you. I mean, this is the kind of logic that they've put forth. So this is very striking. Of course, I'm not the only one who's outraged by this, and neither is the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Their link to their live video is going to be here. There are also 30 cardiologists who have signed on to ask the Annals of Internal Medicine to retract, not go to press. They were rejected outright by the editor, Christine Lane. She didn't even take that into consideration or under advisement. The Institute of Trust, I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm getting that wrong. The Truth Institute, I'll get that right for you in just a second. David Katz from Yale University, 500 physicians who work with him. They have also opposed what the journal has put out and asked them to stop. And then even further, and I love them for this, because ultimately what we're talking about is not doctors' reputations, and it's not the reputation of this journal. What we are talking about is the American health, and it's outlandish that they would put these recommendations to the press, which they know we're all going to get picked up, when you all are the ones who lose. You're the ones paying for a life on pills for high blood pressure, cardiac disease, colorectal cancer. You're the ones paying with pain and inflammation and risk of, dying early and losing family members. We're talking about real costs to the society, and I'm not even talking about the economic costs of what we're doing to Medicare, and I'm not talking about the costs that we do to our economy as we lose good qualified people from the job market because of pre-early deaths. I'm not even talking about those costs. I'm talking about your direct costs of living an unhealthy life and how expensive that is for you and how painful that is for you. How dare these people make these sort of egregious, I'll say erroneous recommendations? Who are they to make this for you and not allow you the facts? I'm not telling you not to eat meat. If you want to eat meat, it is your health. You choose to do with it what you will. What I am advocating for is that you actually get the information that you deserve so that you can make the decision for yourself. So that these people would deny you that, would deny you the accurate information, would take statistics that say one thing and turn them into a summary of recommendations that say another, is outlandish, which is why social media has taken to cancer-causing clickbait. Hashtag cancer-causing clickbait. So we are not alone in this fight because we have Dr. David Katz at Yale and 500 physicians following him. We have the 30 cardiologists. We have the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, who has had to do, as this story gets even more outlandish, who has had to go to the Federal Trade Commission and say, you need to do a cease and desist. This information is incorrect. It is leading people down an unhealthy and dangerous path. And we are uncertain of the motives, but it is not based in scientific fact. It is a distortion of the truth. It is harmful to consumers, and therefore we ask you to intervene. I am so grateful to them for doing this because the poor American consumer, it is constantly confusing for them. There are these studies intentionally sending them down this path and that. How could they know? It encourage everyone to advocate for themselves and to get the information. Again, if you choose to stop eating meat like I have, I feel so much better. I have so much more energy. I truly love it. That was my choice. You can make your choice. The point is, to make your choice, you've got to have the right information. And so you have to advocate for yourself that you can get that right information. So you can go to pcrm.org. Of course, we'll always be keeping updates here live on Jane Unchained. You can also go right to the Federal Trade Commission. You yourself are empowered to do that. And I encourage everyone to do that. There are breaking stories that are going to be happening all week about this. I will have Dr. Neil Barnard on this show, my podcast, Awesome Vegans, this Sunday live on Jane Unchained. I will try to get a rebuttal response from cardiologist Dr. Kim Williams, who's the chief cardiologist at Rush Medical Center in Chicago. I know a lot of doctors are going to want to comment on this. Right now, as we speak, probably the media is churning this out because they know that it's going to get them a lot of clicks. So ultimately, America, your health, your wallet, the quality of life that you lead has boiled down to a bunch of clickbait so that other people can get clicks. I would be outraged if I were you. I am outraged for myself, and I am outraged on your behalf as well. I'm grateful to the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and, of course, Dr. Neil Barnard. That is my recap of the situation. I'm Elizabeth Alfano, live in Fox Lake, Illinois, for Jane Unchained, and we will keep you posted on all.